Texas Hill Country. June 1871. The sun poured down like molten brass over the parched earth, baking the clay soil and wilting what little green dared sprout along the fence line. The grass crunched underfoot dry as ash, and the air shimmered with heat. Abigail Monroe pressed her back against the split-rail fence post, her breath ragged, her hands raw from the splinters. 6 months into her pregnancy, the weight of her unborn child tugged at her belly with every movement. Her apron clung to her with sweat and dust, and her straw bonnet, bent at the brim and fraying, offered little protection from the merciless glare above. She gritted her teeth as she reached for the next strand of barbed wire, her fingers trembling from fatigue and the tremor of hunger. The fence had been breaking in sections for weeks now, dry rot in the posts, rust eating away at the wire, and this morning the southern pasture had given out entirely. A wide gap enough for 3 calves to wriggle through if the scent of creek water or fresh clover caught their noses. And there would be no bringing them back, not on foot, not with a baby swelling in her belly, and no horse since last winter when the last one came up lame and never rose again. She looped the barbed wire around the nailhead again, pulling with all the strength she had left. The tension snapped loose with a jolt, slicing her palm in the process. She hissed, clenching her jaw. Her other hand fumbled for the hammer dangling from her belt, but the ache in her back made it hard to twist. Still, she managed to drive one more nail in. One more piece of work. One more day. The bank would be around again soon, and Curtis Lang, greedy and smirking behind his polished boots, would no doubt follow, sniffing around like a buzzard circling roadkill. She had no man left to ward off such beasts, and the ranch, the land her husband Elijah died defending, was all that stood between her and the wolves. "I can do this," she muttered through clenched teeth, her voice nearly swallowed by the vast silence of the open prairie. Then she heard it hooves. Not many, not a posse, just one. She froze, hammer still in hand. Dust curled in the distance along the ridge trail. A single rider was approaching, tall in the saddleback straight hat pulled low against the sun. Not Lang, not one of his hired boys. This one rode alone. Her breath caught. She adjusted her bonnet with fingers that trembled more from uncertainty than fatigue. She didn't move from the fence post. This was her land. Let the stranger explain himself. The rider drew closer. She could make out the broad shoulders beneath a linen shirt faded by sun and saddle. A long duster hung from him like a curtain of trail dust, the edges ragged from wear. His horse was a dapple-gray gelding, well-muscled and calm beneath its rider's grip. He dismounted slowly, as if not to spook either horse or woman, then removed his hat in a gesture that was equal parts respect and caution. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was rough, the sound of gravel softened by years of use. Abigail narrowed her eyes. Her hand rested on the hammer, but not in threat. More like a shield, a reminder that she still had something left to defend. "You're about to tear that tendon in your arm clean through," he said, nodding toward the wire she'd just wrapped. "And that line's wound backward. Won't hold past the wind's next tantrum." She stiffened. "I know what I'm doing," I believe that he said, voice steady. His eyes were a pale, stormy blue, or maybe gray set beneath a brow weathered by sun and time. He wasn't young, but he moved like a man who still carried strength in his back and certainty in his hands. "Didn't mean offense," he said, walking toward the broken section of fence with slow, deliberate steps. "Name's Delaney. Tom Delaney. Got the north ridge over that bluff." Her spine straightened slightly. The Delaney Ranch. She'd heard of it. Folk in town said it stretched 1,000 acres. He rarely came into town, and when he did, he didn't linger in the saloon or the gambling halls. Some called him strange. Others said he lived with ghosts. I don't need help, she said, less cold than resolute. Didn't offer any. Just figured you might want it fixed right before your calves walk to Mexico. She glanced over her shoulder. 3 spotted heifers grazed not far from the breech heads, down tails flicking lazily. One looked up, almost curiously. She sighed. I'm pregnant, not blind. He gave a soft chuckle and pulled a glove from his belt. If I touch this post, are you going to shoot me? Only if you call me darling. He grinned, just a flicker of humor, like the edge of a knife catching the sun. I wouldn't dream of it. He knelt beside the fence and began working. No fuss, no preaching, just steady hands and purposeful movement. He moved like a man who had done this more times than he could count. Abigail stood silently watching him. Her heart slowed a little. The hammer slipped from her hand and fell into the dirt. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. When he was done, the fence was taut and true, not pretty, but solid. There, he said, standing and brushing his palms on his trousers. Won't win any blue ribbons, but it'll keep your calves in. Abigail nodded slowly. You work quiet. Noise wastes breath. A pause. Then she said Abigail Monroe. This land belonged to my husband Elijah. He didn't come back from Shiloh. Tom's eyes lowered. Mine didn't come back from a house fire. Wife and child. 3 years passed. I reckon there's some kinds of silence no man ever fills again. They stood in the quiet that followed, not strangers, not friends, just 2 people bound by what the prairie had taken from them. You got help out here? He asked gently. No. Water. Yes. Food. Enough. His gaze drifted to the barn. Its roof sagged like a tired back. He didn't comment. You got time to fix all that too? He asked. She looked down. Her hands were cracked and stained. Her boots didn't fit anymore, her feet swollen from heat and the weight of child. She hadn't eaten since dawn. I'll manage, she whispered. Tom said nothing, just turned and reached into his saddlebag. He pulled out a small tin canteen and a cloth-wrapped bundle and set them gently on the fence post. Not charity, he said. Call it neighborly trade. You let me mend a fence, I leave you lunch. Fair deal. She studied the offering, then gave a single nod. Fair. He tipped his hat again and mounted in one clean motion. Before he turned to leave, he glanced back once more. You're doing better than most men I've met, Mrs. Monroe. Just don't let pride get you killed. She watched him ride over the ridge, vanishing into the gold-lit heat waves like a dream sent by a lonely heaven. Only when he was out of sight did she open the cloth. Inside, a half-a-smoked ham sandwich, a boiled egg, a thick slice of peach pie wrapped in wax paper, all fresh, all real. She sat on the dry grass fence behind her field ahead, and she ate. The pie was sweet and soft and impossibly kind, and for the first time in weeks, Abigail Monroe wept. Not from grief, not from fear, but because for just 1 hour, she wasn't alone. Outside Llano, Texas. Early evening. June 1871. The trail dust clung to Mariah's lashes as she stared at the horizon, numb in every sense but shame. She sat slumped against a broken wagon wheel, wrists bound in rope that had once tethered a mule. Her throat burned from thirst and her arms stung from the sun. She hadn't spoken since noon, not because she refused, but because silence was safer than begging. Behind her, the creaking of old leather and a slurred voice echoed from the campsite where her father laughed with the Apache chief. Or maybe he was a war leader. She didn't know. All she knew was the man's name, Tassin. He had eyes like night storms and hands that moved like river water, slow but sure. His face had not changed since he'd first laid eyes on her. Not lust, not cruelty, just stillness. More whiskey, eh? Her father slurred, shoving the canteen toward Tassun. Hell, for a chief, you don't drink much. Tassun didn't respond. He simply accepted the tin, took a polite sip, and set it beside him in the grass. The fire crackled between them, small and unassuming, but it seemed to be the only thing alive in that clearing, besides the buzz of flies and the scent of old sweat. Mariah's heart beat against the inside of her ribs like a trapped bird. "I done told you," her father said, licking dry lips. "She can't bear no child. Ain't worth a damn to no white man. Doctor said her womb is like a dead tree. But you said you wanted a woman to keep your house and rub your back. Well, this one cooks good enough. She's quiet, and she'll do what she's told." Mariah shut her eyes. Tassun turned his gaze toward her, not cruelly, not coldly, just watching, measuring. Her father leaned in across the fire. "I want 2 good horses, the kind that can ride in the heat and don't spook, and maybe a silver bracelet. My wife used to like silver. Your wife is in the ground," Tassun said calmly. His English was fluent, but each word landed like a stone dropped in a still pond. The drunkard laughed, rocking back on his heels. "Damn straight she is. And this one here. Her mother was Apache herself. Guess that makes her part yours already." That made Tassun's brows lift slightly. Not surprise, not pride, just interest. "She doesn't speak your tongue," the father continued, as if the girl wasn't sitting just 20 feet away. "She don't speak much of anything these days, not since the last fella left her. But she'll obey. She knows better than to raise her voice now." Mariah turned her face toward the horizon, blinking back the salt in her eyes. She wasn't deaf like her father always told others. She heard everything, every cruel whisper, every negotiation over her like she was a hog at market. Every time he had told folks in town she was touched in the head, she'd swallowed the lie just to stay out of reach. But this wasn't a lie anymore, this was a sale. She would be sold tonight, and no preacher would witness it. No law would object. No neighbor would protest. Tassun finally spoke. "If you sell her like a goat, what will stop you from selling the next one?" Her father narrowed his eyes. "Ain't got no next one." Tassun stood tall and slow like the rising of a mountain. "Then let's be done." He walked past the fire toward the girl. Mariah flinched. Not visibly, but inside deep in her chest where she'd buried her instincts long ago. She braced herself for the rough hand, the spit of words she wouldn't understand, the blow that always came when a man thought she owed him something. But instead, he knelt. He cut the ropes with a knife so sharp it whispered through hemp like silk. Then he said, "I won't hurt you." She looked up. The shadows of dusk played across his face. His skin was coppered from sun and wind, his hair braided with a leather cord. But it was his eyes that undid her dark and fathomless yes, but not cruel. He offered his hand, not a command, an invitation. Mariah hesitated. Then, slowly, she placed her bruised fingers in his palm. It was warm, steady, and calloused like he knew hard work, not just power. Behind them, her father cackled. "Don't expect her to be grateful. She's a dry well boy. You'll get no sons out of her." Tassun didn't answer. He led her toward his painted pony, letting her lean on him as she limped. He lifted her onto the horse like she was fragile pottery, something valuable even if chipped. Mariah didn't look back, but she heard her father's parting words. "Don't bring her back. She's yours now." They rode in silence for a long while. The moon rose soft and full over the Texas hills, casting a silver glow on the cactus flowers and mesquite. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of cedar and dust. She expected him to speak first, to lay out rules, to demand obedience. But Tassin only rode quietly beside her, glancing over every now and then, not with suspicion, but with calm attention. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice cracked like a dry branch. "Why did you take me?" He didn't look at her at first, just kept riding. Then he said, "Because I saw a woman, not a curse." She swallowed. "You don't believe him?" she asked. "I believe your father drinks lies." She almost smiled. Almost. They camped beside a river that night. A small one, shallow and clear. Tassoon built a fire and laid out a blanket for her to sit on. He boiled beans and flatbread and offered her the first portion. She ate in silence, watching the flames dance. After a long time, she asked, "What do you expect of me?" Tassoon poked the fire. "Nothing." She blinked. "Nothing. You owe me nothing. You were traded like property, but I am not the one who sees you that way." "Then why?" "Because I was once sold too," he said. "At a time when I was small. My mother gave me to a white family in exchange for safety. I slept in the barn, ate the scraps, learned their tongue. Then I left. I returned to my people." He met her gaze. "I saw myself in you." A long silence passed between them. Then she said quietly, "I'm not whole. No one, as he said. But some are worth more broken than others are whole." Mariah stared at the fire, unsure what to say to that. Her throat ached, not from thirst, but from the weight of years where no one had ever spoken to her that gently. As the flames flickered low, Tassoon unrolled a second blanket and lay down across the fire from her, his back to her, his hands behind his head. She looked at his silhouette, quiet, unmoving. For the first time in her life, she felt safer in the wilderness with a stranger than she had ever felt in a house with kin. She lay down slowly, the fire crackling between them like a line neither would cross. And as she stared up at the stars, her belly empty, but her soul less so, Mariah whispered into the night, "Maybe I'm not cursed after all." And the stars above, in their quiet wisdom, seemed to agree. Somewhere along the Llano River. Morning, June 1871. Mariah woke to the soft murmur of water and the scent of smoke curling from the last dying embers of their fire. She blinked slowly, the ache in her back reminding her that she'd slept on the ground. Still, it was the best sleep she'd had in weeks, maybe months. There were no boots stomping near her head, no drunken cursing in the night, no hands reaching for her in the dark. Just the wind, the river, and a silence that felt gentle. Across the fire pit, Tassoon stood knee-deep in the river, bare-chested, the morning light gold against his dark skin. His long black hair, still braided in two simple ropes, was damp at the ends. He moved slowly, methodically, washing his arms and chest like it was a ritual, not just hygiene. Mariah turned away quickly, embarrassed by her watching. But he had already seen. "You may bathe if you wish," Tassoon said calmly, his voice carrying across the water without force. "I will stay downstream." She hesitated, then nodded once. He waded out of the river, grabbing a hide towel from the saddlebag. Without looking at her again, he moved behind the tall grass, giving her space. Mariah stood brushing dust from her skirts. Her dress still bore the tears from her father's drunken hands, and the dried blood from the sharp brambles they'd passed through. But now, in the rising warmth of morning, she felt the weight of it more, how heavy the grime had become, how tight the shame clung to her skin. She stepped into the cool water slowly. Her breath caught as it wrapped around her legs, then her waist. But as she dunked her head and scrubbed the filth from her arms and throat, something began to lift not from her body, but from her soul. She didn't rush. No one was barking orders. No one was waiting to beat impatience into her bones. And when she stepped back onto the bank, dripping and shivering, Tassin handed her a folded cloth. A clean one. "It is not much," he said, "but better than what you wear." Mariah unfolded it. A simple cotton dress, worn but clean, pale blue with faint embroidery at the collar clearly stitched by hand. She clutched it to her chest, her voice cracking. This was someone else's. "Yes, your wife?" He paused, then shook his head. "My sister. She died in the winter 2 years ago." Mariah looked down. "I shouldn't. She would have offered it herself," he said. Mariah turned her back and changed behind the willow trees. When she stepped out again, the dress hung loosely on her frame, but the fabric felt like a second skin, light and soft and hers. They packed camp in silence. The pony, loyal and calm, stood waiting. Tassoon strapped the cooking tin and water skin to the saddle while Mariah watched him, unsure of what to do. Finally, she asked, "Where are we going?" He didn't answer immediately. He tied down the last satchel, then looked at her. "To where no one will sell you again." That wasn't a direction, but it was enough. They traveled north, following the bends of the river and the whispering cottonwoods that lined its banks. The land was wide and alive. Deer watched from the hills, and hawks circled in the open sky. Wildflowers bloomed between the rocks, yellow, violet, and red, defiant against the dust. Tassoon didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were clean, deliberate. "Do you know how to ride?" Mariah glanced at the pony. "I've ridden a mule. A few times." He nodded. "We will teach the pony to be gentle." The first time she climbed into the saddle, her knees trembled. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "You're too weak to ride. You'd fall off and break that cursed spine." But Tassoon said nothing like that. He merely walked beside the horse as she rode, one hand near the reins, the other resting calmly on the animal's neck. When the pony spooked at a rattling bush, she gasped and pulled tight, but Tassoon steadied them both. "Breathe," he said quietly. "The horse feels what you feel." By dusk her legs ached and her back burned, but she'd stayed in the saddle. She hadn't fallen. That night they camped beneath a bluff where the rocks glowed pink in the sunset. Tassoon caught a rabbit with a sling and roasted it slowly, while Mariah gathered dry branches and flint. She'd never lit a fire before. Her father never trusted her near flame. But when she struck spark to stone and a tiny ember flared, Tassoon simply nodded, once a small look of approval crossing his face. They ate in silence again, though not from fear this time. Just peace. Mariah spoke first. "You said I wasn't cursed." "You are not," Tassoon replied. "Then why did the doctor say I couldn't have children?" He chewed thoughtfully, then swallowed. "Some men see only what they expect to see, and they call it truth." She blinked at him. "There are herbs, roots," he added softly. "Some that can make a womb go quiet, if given often, if given without consent." Mariah's hands stilled. "You think he did that to me, my father?" Tassoon didn't answer, but he didn't have to. Tears welled in her eyes, not just from fear, but from fury. For the first time in her life, she allowed the anger to rise. She didn't push it down. She let it burn. "You think I can still be fixed?" "You are not broken," he said gently. They lay under the stars again, closer this time. The fire between them burned lower, and the silence between them felt warm. As she stared up at the heavens, Mariah whispered, "What are you to me now?" Tassoon didn't move, but his voice came low and even. "I am what you wish me to be. Protector, companion, nothing if that is what you choose." She turned her head toward him. "You don't want a wife." "I want what is given freely," he said, "not what is taken." She didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever offered her a choice before. No one had ever let her define what she would be. She fell asleep that night with the scent of juniper in the air, the heat of the fire warming her face, and the sound of a man breathing softly across the way, not like a threat, but like an anchor. In the days that followed, they moved deeper into hill country, far from roads, from towns, from names she remembered. Tassoon showed her how to track rabbit prints in the sand, how to use cedar bark for kindling, how to listen to the wind for signs of oncoming weather. She learned quickly, and he never raised his voice, not once. When she misstepped or failed, he merely showed her again, no frustration, no scorn, as if teaching her was not a burden, but an offering. On the fourth night, a storm rolled in. They found shelter beneath an overhang of rock barely wide enough for the two of them and the horse. Rain lashed the cliffs above, and thunder shook the earth. Mariah trembled not from cold, but from the thunder in her bones. She remembered nights like this when she'd been left outside to punish her silence. Tassoon reached over and placed a blanket around her shoulders. His touch lingered only long enough to anchor her. "You're safe," he said softly. She turned to him, eyes wet. "I don't understand you." He didn't answer. "I've known nothing but cruelty, nothing but pain. And now you will know something else." She blinked. Tassoon looked at her, not as a man starved for a woman, not as a buyer satisfied with a purchase, but as a soul recognizing another soul equal and unowned. Mariah wrapped the blanket tighter, staring at the storm beyond the rock. For the first time, she didn't flinch at the thunder. She leaned her head against the stone and whispered, "Then teach me how to be unafraid." And Tassoon, with no arrogance, no promise, only truth, replied, "I will." Highlands east of the Llano, July 1871. The summer wind swept through the cedar-covered hills, rustling dry leaves like whispered prayers. Morning light filtered through branches above, scattering golden patches across the red earth as Mariah followed Tassoon up a narrow game trail. Her legs ached, but she didn't complain. Not anymore. A week ago, she wouldn't have lasted the first hour. Now she carried her own water skin, her own satchel of dried meat and bread, and walked with a bow slung across her shoulder, lightweight, carved from oak, and strung by Tassoon himself. "Keep your eyes downwind," he told her quietly, pointing at faint prints in the dirt. "The deer are near." Mariah nodded, squinting toward the horizon. Her braid stuck to her neck with sweat, but her heart beat with purpose. Hunting with Tassoon wasn't about killing, it was about learning balance, about listening, watching, reading the land like it was a language. When they reached the ridge, they crouched in the brush. Below them, in a grassy hollow framed by cottonwoods, a small herd of mule deer grazed too. Does a young buck and a fawn with long, trembling legs. Mariah's breath caught. "It's beautiful." Tassoon studied her face, not the deer. "You feel sorrow." She looked at him. No, just reverence. He nodded once. Then, slowly, he reached into his pouch and pulled out a single white feather eagle, she thought, though, it was worn at the tip. He held it out to her. "When you take a life offer, thanks, and carry a piece of that thanks with you." Mariah accepted the feather with both hands. They didn't take a shot that morning. The wind shifted, the deer scattered, and Tassoon only smiled. "Sometimes the lesson is in the stillness," he said. Later that afternoon, they made camp by a small creek shaded with sycamore. The sun blistered overhead, but the water cooled their feet, and the breeze carried the scent of sage. Mariah washed the dirt from her hands, letting the cool stream run over her wrists. Tassoon knelt nearby, mending the torn hem of his shirt with a bone needle. They didn't speak much anymore, not because there was nothing to say, but because silence had become a language of its own. Still, there were questions she hadn't dared ask. As the light waned and shadows stretched across the land, Mariah finally turned toward him and said, "Why did you never marry?" Tassoon didn't look up from the stitching. I almost did. Once. What happened? He paused, pulled the thread tight. Her father didn't trust me. Said I had too much of the white world in my blood, too many words, not enough scars. Mariah furrowed her brow. That doesn't sound like a flaw. To him it was. She swallowed. Did you love her? Yes, but not the way I look at you. Her breath caught. He met her gaze now, steady grounded. With her, I loved what was promised. With you, I love what is. Mariah didn't speak. Couldn't. The words folded into her chest like soft cloth absorbing years of cold. Tassoon stood and tossed another log onto the fire. The flames crackled to life, casting golden light across his face. She studied him quietly, the way his hands moved slow and sure, the faint line of an old scar across his collarbone, the steadiness in his breath. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old either. He'd seen hardship, but it hadn't hardened him. It had made him deliberate, honest, and she wasn't afraid of him. That was the miracle. That night, the fire burned longer than usual. Mariah sat with her knees drawn close, a blanket draped around her shoulders. Her voice was soft when she finally broke the silence. "Do you believe people can be made new?" Tassoon stirred the fire with a stick, pushing the embers gently. "No." Her heart sank. "But I believe," he continued, "they can be revealed, like a stone in the river, worn down until only the truth remains." She nodded slowly, watching the flames dance. "My father, he told everyone I was deaf or stupid, sometimes both. He made sure no one ever wanted to speak to me." "I know," Tassoon said. Mariah blinked. "How?" "Because I watched how you listened before you spoke. And I watched how you paused before you touched anything." He looked at her directly now. "That is not stupidity. That is fear." She dropped her gaze. "I see you, Mariah, even when you think you are hidden." The wind picked up around midnight. Not harsh, but urgent. Tassoon stood and listened. "What is it?" she asked, rising with him. "Someone is near." Mariah's breath froze. Tassoon moved swiftly but quietly, gathering the fire's edges into sand. "Not white men. Their horses sound different. This is someone from my mother's people." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a necklace, a string of blue and black beads, and tied it around his wrist. "Wait here. Do not run." Before she could speak, he vanished into the dark footsteps, silent as shadow. Mariah waited. The minutes passed like hours. She crouched behind the sycamore trunk, gripping a stick in one hand, heart pounding. Then, footsteps. Not Tassoon's. Louder, heavier. A figure emerged from the brush, tall, wrapped in furs despite the heat hair braided in a single long rope down the back. A man. Mariah stood back, pressed to the tree. But behind him, Tassoon appeared, his presence calm as a mountain. "It's all right," he said, stepping forward. "This is my uncle. His name is Chogan." The man gave her a nod. His eyes were sharp, but not cruel. "He heard of a white girl traveling with an Apache," Tassoon explained. "Rumors came through the river valley." Mariah stiffened. "Are they looking for me?" "No," Chogan said, his voice low. "They are looking for him." He gestured to Tassoon. Mariah looked between them. Chogan continued. "There are men, mercenaries from town, offering coin for the return of a stolen girl. They say you were kidnapped by a savage. Your father has been talking." Mariah clenched her fists. "He sold me like cattle. He said I was a burden." Tassoon nodded. "That's the story we must bury." Chogan looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "You wish to stay with him?" Mariah didn't hesitate. "Yes." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then the valley's no longer safe. You must move west. into the canyonlands, deeper than the white men dare follow. Tassoon turned to her. It is a hard land, few comforts, many dangers. Mariah stepped closer. I'm not afraid, not when I'm with you. A long silence passed between them. Then Tassoon looked at Chogan and said, Then we go tomorrow. Tell the others I will return one day, with her at my side. Chogan clasped his nephew's arm. Then go, and do not look back. They broke camp at dawn. As the sun rose, Mariah stood beside Tassoon, watching the golden light stretch across the hills. The world felt larger now, wilder, but she no longer felt lost in it. Tassoon tightened the saddle and helped her onto the pony. He walked beside her for the first mile as he always did, before finally swinging into his own saddle and riding at her side. What will we find in the canyon? She asked. He smiled faintly. Home, but not the kind with walls. She looked ahead at the trail, winding through the scrub and stone at the sky widening with every hoofbeat, and whispered, That's the only kind I ever wanted. And for the first time, Mariah didn't feel like a traded thing. She felt chosen. The canyons west of the Pecos, August 1871. The land changed as they rode west. Gone were the soft hills and shady creeks. In their place rose red stone cliffs, jagged and ancient, etched with wind and time. The air was dry as tinder, the sun a searing eye overhead. Mesquite and cactus dotted the ground, sharp and stubborn, surviving on little but grit. Mariah had never seen country like this. It was not beautiful in the way green valleys were beautiful, but it held something older, something proud. It didn't ask for admiration. It didn't need to be tamed. And neither did she any more. They rode in silence much of the day. Tassoon moved like he belonged to the land, his horse light-footed over rock and gravel, eyes constantly scanning the horizon, ears tuned to every shift in the wind. Mariah did her best to follow his lead, adjusting her posture, watching his hands, mimicking how he held his reins. When they finally reached a narrow cut in the canyon wall, hidden between two towering boulders, Tassoon pulled back and dismounted. This is where we stay, he said. Mariah slid from her saddle, her legs aching from the ride. He led her through the passage, barely wide enough for a single person. On the other side, the world opened into a hidden hollow, a wide shelf of red rock shaded by an overhang. A spring bubbled faintly from the cliffside, feeding a shallow pool surrounded by wiry grass and thorny brush. A cave yawned against the far wall, deep dry, sheltered from storm and sun alike. Mariah's breath caught. It's, she whispered. Tassoon turned to her. Safe, and it was. Tucked away from trails, hidden by stone, protected from eyes and bullets alike. They unpacked their things in the fading heat, laying woven blankets over the cave floor, stacking supplies against the cool stone wall. Tassoon showed her where to store water in gourds, how to dry jerky using heated rocks, how to keep snakes away with crushed sage and sulfur. By nightfall they had a fire glowing in the hollow and stew bubbling in a tin pot. Mariah sat wrapped in a shawl, her knees drawn close. Above them the stars burned clear and sharp, as if the sky had been scrubbed of everything false. They stayed there for days. Tassoon taught her how to read the canyon's moods, how its colors shifted with the hour, how shadows moved across the cliffs like stories. He showed her how to climb rock ledges using footholds the size of a coin, how to track lizards and rabbits, how to gather edible roots from the dry creek beds. Mariah was no longer a guest in his world. She was becoming part of it. Each day she grew stronger. Her skin darkened with sun, her arms firmed from labor. She could start a fire with flint, find water beneath stones, even hit a target with her bow from 20 paces. But it wasn't the survival skills that changed her most. It was the quiet trust building between them. One morning, while gathering firewood near the canyon's edge, Mariah stumbled across a pile of smooth stones arranged in a spiral. She paused, brow furrowed. Tassin appeared behind her, silent as always. "You found the prayer spiral," he said gently. "What does it mean?" "It's a promise," he said, kneeling beside it. "Each stone represents a step toward something. Peace, healing, forgiveness." She traced the spiral with her fingers. "Have you walked it?" He nodded. "Many times." Mariah looked up at him. "What do you pray for?" He met her gaze. "That the pain I carry does not pass to those I love." She felt something twist in her chest. Then softly she said, "I want to build one." He said nothing but handed her a stone. That evening, as the sun bled across the canyon walls, Mariah placed her first stone beside his, then a second, and a third. She didn't pray out loud. She didn't have to. Each stone held a memory, her mother's soft humming while braiding Mariah's hair, the sound of her father's boots when he came home drunk, the moment she realized no one was coming to rescue her. Stone by stone, she gave it all to the earth. When she finished, she looked at Tassin. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. "I'm not broken," she whispered, "just buried." He reached out, touched her hand. "Then we'll uncover you, one day at a time." Later that night, the wind picked up again, howling through the canyon walls like an old ghost. The fire flickered. Inside the cave, Mariah couldn't sleep. Tassoon lay nearby, eyes open, watching the shadows dance across the ceiling. "You're awake," she said. "I always listen," he replied. She sat up. "Do you think they'll come for me?" "The men from town." He was quiet for a long moment. "They might, but we are far, and your father is a coward. He'd rather lie than bleed." Still, her heart twisted. What if they come anyway? What if they say, "I don't belong with you"? Tassoon looked over at her, his voice low and even. "Then I will tell them that I do not care what they say, because your voice is the only one I listen to." She turned to him, heart racing. "Tassin, why haven't you touched me?" His eyes didn't waver. "Because I want you to choose me. Not just stay because there is nowhere else." Tears welled in her eyes. "But I have chosen you. I chose you that night by the fire. I chose you when you stood between me and the world." He rose to one knee beside her, his fingers brushing her cheek. "Then speak it plain." Mariah's voice trembled. "I want to be yours, not by trade, not by fear, but because I am more myself with you than I've ever been alone." Tassoon leaned in and kissed her slow and reverent like a prayer offered on the wind. They became lovers in that cave, not in heat or haste, but in quiet certainty. He touched her like she was something sacred, not fragile. She learned his skin like scripture, where the old scars told stories where the soft hollows rested between strength. That night, as they lay together beneath a canopy of stone and stars, Mariah realized something she had never dared believe. This was not survival. This was living. The next morning, the world felt different. She stood at the canyon's edge, watching the sky stretch out forever. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but light traced the edges of the cliffs in gold. Tassoon came up behind her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "What do you see?" he asked. Mariah smiled. "Not the end of a trail. Not anymore." He looked at her. "I see a beginning," she whispered. And for the first time in her life, that beginning didn't come with fear. It came with fire. Canyon Lands. Late August 1871. The canyon had a sound to it. Not noise sound. A language made of wind brushing stone, of cicadas clicking in the heat of lizards darting over dry gravel. Mariah had learned to read those sounds like words, like warnings. So the moment she stepped out of the cave that morning and noticed the hush, that unnatural hush, she stopped cold. No bird call, no wind, only silence. Tassoon appeared beside her, already alert. His hand hovered near the knife strapped to his hip. He sniffed the air once, his nostrils flaring like a wolf catching scent. Then, without a word, he crouched and began examining the ground. Mariah followed, her heart thudding. They moved along the edge of the canyon wall, past their makeshift drying rack, and down to the outer flat where the path turned north. That's when they saw it. A boot print, clear as daylight in the dry silt, deep, wide, not theirs. Mariah's breath caught. Tassoon placed his hand over it, then rose. 3 men, maybe 4, came through in the night. She swallowed. Do you think they saw the fire? The cave. He shook his head. No, but they're hunting, and they're close. Mariah felt her legs weaken. Her instincts told her to run, to grab what she could and flee with Tassoon into deeper canyon. But something else rose inside her, too stronger than panic. Anger. She clenched her fists. Why are they following me? What do they want now? Tassoon's voice was low. Some men can't stand to lose something they think they owned. But he sold me, she snapped. He threw me away. And now he wants the story to end with his version. That he was robbed. That he was wronged. Not that you escaped. Mariah stood there trembling. Then she said, I'm not going back. He met her eyes. I know. They packed quickly. Not in panic, but in practiced silence. Blankets were rolled. Jerky and water distributed into 2 satchels. Mariah helped Tassoon kick sand over their fire pit, scattering the ashes until it was nothing but a dull gray smear. Where do we go? She asked. West, he said. Deeper. There's an old water cave near the bluff used by my people when raiders came north. They saddled the horses, mounted, and rode hard, no trail, no pause, no backward glances. By noon, they reached the hidden bluff. It was wedged between 2 towering red walls, shaded and cool, and covered by a curtain of hanging sagebrush. Inside, the cave opened like a pocket, narrow but deep, lined with smooth stone and an underground trickle of fresh water. It wasn't home, but it would do. As they settled in, Mariah sat on a flat rock and opened her canteen, staring at the dirt outside the cave entrance. Do you think they'll follow us here? Tassoon was tying the horses to a low tree branch. If they know what they're doing, they'll find our old prints. But I left false ones headed east. It'll buy us time. Mariah looked down at her hands. They'll try to take me again, she said softly, to drag me back and make it all like it was. He knelt beside her. They can try, but I will not let them. She turned toward him. And what if they hurt you? What if they kill you trying? His voice was steady. Then I'll still die free, and so will you. She couldn't stop the tears now. They slid down her cheeks, not from fear, but from fury. I don't want to be a reason you get hurt. You're not, he said. You're the reason I live like I mean it. The sun began to lower behind the canyon, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Mariah helped Tassoon set up a narrow trip line made from dried gut and bones, a silent alarm that would rattle if disturbed. They ate dried beans and hard bread. No fire, no light. Mariah sat in the dark with her back against the cave wall, watching Tassoon clean his knife with a scrap of cloth. Can I ask you something? She whispered. Yes. Have you ever killed a man? He looked up. Yes. Her throat tightened. Did you? Did you regret it? His voice didn't waver. No. He was hunting a child. I stopped him. She nodded, understanding. And if they come again, he answered without pause, I'll stop them too. Later that night, Mariah couldn't sleep. The weight of being hunted again lay heavy on her chest like a stone. Every owl cry made her flinch. Every rustle of leaves felt like a threat. She rose quietly and slipped outside the cave, standing beneath the moonlight. The wind brushed her face, cooler now, quieter. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "I'm not that girl anymore. I'm not his daughter. I'm not a burden. I'm not cursed." Behind her, she heard soft steps. Tasun. He didn't speak, just came to stand beside her. After a long pause, she said, "Even if they find us, they won't take me alive. I'd rather die right here." Tasun reached down and gently placed something in her hand. A knife, small, bone-handled, sharp. "I never give blades to those who are afraid," he said, "but I trust you." Mariah stared at the knife. "You think I'll need it. I think you deserve to have it." She gripped it tightly. For the first time in her life, a weapon didn't scare her. It gave her peace. Just before dawn, the silence broke. A dry twig snapped, then another. Tasun jolted awake, knife in hand. Mariah grabbed hers, too, crouching low, then shouting. Male voices. 3, maybe 4. A flashlight flickered between the trees. "She's in there," a voice called. "Damn Apache's with her. Get the rifle." Tasun's eyes met hers. "This ends now," he said. She nodded, teeth clenched. Let it end. The next few minutes passed like a storm. Tasun slipped out the side of the cave using the rocks as cover. Mariah crouched near the entrance, her blade ready. Her heart wasn't pounding now. It was slow, focused. A shot cracked. She flinched but didn't scream. Then another, then 2 more. Men shouting, running, one crying out in pain. And then silence. Footsteps returned. Mariah stood up, knife still clenched. But it was Tasun. Blood streaked his shoulder, but he was walking. "It's done," he said quietly. Mariah dropped the knife and ran to him. "Are you hurt?" "Just grazed." She pressed her forehead to his chest. "You came back." He held her tight. Always. Later, as the sun rose over the crimson cliffs, they buried the bodies in shallow graves near the ridge. Mariah didn't flinch. She watched as Tasun placed stones over each one, offering a single line of breath in his native tongue. A prayer not for the dead, but for the land. Then they packed. It was time to move again. Not in fear, but in strength. As they rode west that afternoon, Mariah looked back at the canyon one last time. That cave had been their shelter, but it was the fire inside her that had kept her alive. She looked at Tasun. "You said once that the river wears down the stone, and the truth remains." He nodded. "Well," she said softly, "I think I've finally found mine." He reached out and took her hand in his, and together they rode on toward a future no man could take from them. The wind had shifted by dusk, cooler, sharper, carrying with it the scent of dry cedar and something heavier unsettled. The horizon was bruised with thunderclouds rolling low over the Texas hills like a warning. Tom Delaney stood on the front porch of the Monroe Ranch, arms folded, watching the light disappear behind a curtain of steel gray. He'd seen weather like this before, fast, violent, and unrelenting. Inside, Abigail paced with a slow unease, one hand pressed to her lower back, the other resting against her belly. The child within her stirred more than usual, as if sensing the air's electricity. The day had passed quietly, almost too quietly. But quiet in the west was never stillness. It was the pause before something broke. Tom stepped in as the first rumble cracked the distance. "Best shutter the windows," he said, already moving toward the back room. Storm's riding in heavy. Abigail nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's the kind that likes to take shingles off. I'll check the barn after this. Make sure the animals are secure." She watched him work with steady hands, every movement deliberate. He was always calm in the face of what others feared. That was one of the reasons she trusted him, even when she hadn't meant to. The wind slammed against the house as he latched the final shutter. The lanterns flickered. Rain began to fall light at first, then harder, faster, drumming against the roof like 1,000 galloping hooves. Abigail winced as another contraction caught her unaware. "You all right?" Tom asked, turning back toward her. I think so. It's just—" She leaned against the wall, breathing slow. They're closer now. Stronger. Tom was beside her in a blink, not panicked, just alert. It might be time. "No," she said, eyes fierce. "It's early. I still got weeks." He didn't argue. He only helped her into the chair near the hearth and stoked the fire higher. Outside, lightning split the sky, casting strange shadows through the slats of the shutters. The ranch house groaned with wind, but it held just as she had all these months. Just as they both had. Another bolt cracked this one close enough to shake the floorboards. Tom glanced toward the window, then toward her. "I won't leave your side." Abigail gave a soft laugh through clenched teeth. "I never asked you to." "No, but I'm staying anyhow." She closed her eyes as another contraction rippled through her, sharp and unrelenting. "This ain't how I pictured it," she whispered. "Nothing ever is," Tom replied gently, already gathering quilts, towels, and the battered leather bag he'd stashed weeks ago just in case. The rain beat down harder. The storm was directly overhead now, and inside the house the air was thick with heat, with fear, with something like hope stubbornly hanging on. Abigail gritted her teeth as she sank to her knees. "Tom, I can't. Not like this. Not alone." "You're not," he said, kneeling beside her. "You hear me, Abby? You're not alone." Lightning flashed again, bathing them in a ghostly light. Thunder followed, and somewhere beyond the pasture a tree split clean in two. The world shook, but Tom didn't flinch. He helped her settle on a pile of folded blankets near the fire. Lanterns lit the corners of the room, their glow soft against the storm. Abigail's breath came in ragged bursts. "Just breathe with me," Tom said, sitting behind her arms, steady as he supported her back. "In and out. Like riding through wind, keep low, keep firm." She clutched his hand, her nails digging in. "It hurts," she gasped. "God, Tom, it hurts." "I know." His voice broke for the first time, just a crack. "But you're the strongest woman I've ever known. And you're not going through this without someone who gives a damn." Hours passed, like minutes, each moment stretched and torn by pain and time. The storm outside raged on, but the real storm was here in the center of that small room where life fought to enter the world. Abigail screamed once, a sound torn from deep within, primal and holy. Tom held her tighter. "You're almost there," he whispered. Another push, another breath. Then, at last, the world held its breath with her, and a cry, sharp, fierce, alive, rose above the thunder. Tom's hands trembled as he caught the child swaddling him in one of Abigail's quilts. He stared down at the slick, red-faced boy and exhaled slowly. The storm had passed. "You did it," he said, placing the baby in her arms. "He's here." Abigail looked down at the child, her face wet with sweat and tears. He's beautiful." Tom didn't speak. He just rested his forehead against hers, breath mingling their child cradled between them. In that moment, the world outside could have burned, and they wouldn't have noticed. By morning, the storm had rolled east, leaving behind puddles and debris, but the house stood firm. The pasture glistened in dawn's light, and the clouds broke to reveal a sky scrubbed clean by the night's fury. Inside the parlor was quiet, but full of warmth of life, of something unspoken and binding. Tom stood at the back window, cup of coffee cooling in his hands, watching as the cattle grazed in the distance. The baby slept in a crate lined with wool near the hearth, and Abigail dozed nearby, a light blanket pulled over her shoulders. He turned when he heard movement. Abigail sat up slowly, blinking against the morning light. Did he wake? Not yet, just breathing easy. She smiled, tired and soft. You didn't have to stay all night. I didn't plan to leave, he said. Abigail rose, careful and slow. She walked to the table and picked up a folded slip of paper. She handed it to him without a word. He unfolded it. It was the deed. His name, her name. The child unnamed but belonging all the same. I found it in the bottom of the chest, she said. After James died, I didn't know what to do with it. Tom looked at her. You don't have to decide anything today. I already have, she said. This land, this house, it's more than just a place. It's where my child was born, where you stayed when no one else would. Tom lowered the paper. I never did it for a reward. I know. She stepped closer. That's why it means something. He didn't reach for her. He didn't speak. But the quiet between them wrapped around the room like a vow. Later that day, Abigail stood on the porch with the baby in her arms, wrapped tight against the wind that still carried a bite. She watched Tom as he repaired the eastern fence. His sleeves were rolled, his brow furrowed, but he moved with a calm purpose, like the storm had only reaffirmed his place here. The baby stirred and whimpered. Abigail kissed the boy's head and whispered, "That's your father, little one. Maybe not by blood, but by every measure that matters." Tom saw her watching and raised a hand. She lifted the baby just enough for him to see, and he smiled. Just a little, but it was enough. That night, as the fire burned low, Abigail brought out a bundle of cloth. She unwrapped it, slowly revealing the carved cedar plaque Tom had once handed her. J. Monroe Delaney, it read. She ran her fingers over the letters. "I think I'm ready to use it," she said. Tom looked up from his chair, eyes catching the firelight. "Sure, I am." He rose, crossed the room, and stood beside her. Abigail held the plaque to his chest. "I want it over the door. This is our home now, all three of us." Tom took it gently. "Then I'll hang it myself." She smiled, leaning against him. "And when people ask what it means, I'll say it's the name of the man who stayed." Tom turned toward the door plaque in hand. Outside, the night was calm. The wind stirred the grass. The stars glimmered overhead. The storm was gone, but something stronger remained. The sign above the door creaked gently in the spring wind. J. Monroe Delaney, carved deep into polished cedar, stained by hand hung with brass nails Tom had shaped himself. It wasn't fancy, not the kind of thing a man would order from a store in Austin or Fort Worth, but it was theirs, and it meant something now. It told a story, a quiet one, a strong one. 1 year had passed since the stormy night when little Jacob was born. The land had healed, and so had the people on it. Green grass now stretched thick across the hills, fences stood mended, and the ranch had come back to life, not as James Monroe's old dream, but as something new, something that bore both their names. Abigail stood by the edge of the porch in her sun-worn dress sleeves, rolled up hands on her hips. Her hair had grown longer again, catching bits of light when the wind lifted it. Jacob toddled by her boots, chasing after a wooden horse toy Tom had carved for his first birthday. "Don't go too far now," she said, crouching down to catch him before he tumbled off the porch. "That little slope's not as gentle as it looks." Jacob squealed with delight, showing no fear. He had his mother's grit and his father's quiet, watching eyes. Tom stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves collar open, and though he still walked like a man who'd lived too long alone, there was softness in his movements now. Not weakness. Never that, but steadiness. The kind a woman could lean on without losing her own footing. "Fence on the north ridge is holding fine," he said. "That bull calf's getting cocky, though. We'll have to move him soon." Abigail nodded. "We've got room to expand east. Water runs better there anyway." "You thinking about more cattle?" he asked, walking up beside her. "Thinking about what this land can hold," she replied, glancing out at the fields. "What it's meant to be. Feels wrong to let it just stay small." Tom looked at her, then at Jacob, toddling through the sunlight toy horse clenched in his hand. "Not so small anymore." She smiled. "No, it ain't." They stood together a moment, shoulder to shoulder, watching the child chase a butterfly. Abigail reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded letter. "I got something yesterday." He raised a brow. "From who?" "My sister." Tom blinked. "Didn't know you still kept in touch." "I didn't," she said. "Not until recently. I wrote her after Jacob was born. Took a while for her to write back." He waited, patient as always. "She's in Galveston now. Married. Says they've got a shop near the wharf. She asked if I'd come visit." Tom said nothing at first, but his jaw shifted just slightly. "I told her I might," Abigail added, her voice low, "but only if you came too." Tom's head turned, his eyes soft. "Me?" She nodded. "You and Jacob." He scratched his chin. "Never been farther east than San Antonio." "I think you'd like the sea," she said, "but not as much as you like home." Tom looked toward the horizon. "This is home. Then maybe we take a piece of it with us just for a while." Jacob tumbled near the edge of the porch, and both of them moved in the same breath, catching him together. Tom swept the boy into his arms, the little one giggling as he clutched his father's beard with tiny fingers. "You're a strong little fella," Tom murmured. "Just like your mama." Abigail watched them, her heart catching in her chest, the way it always did now when she saw them like this, bonded by more than blood or law, bound by choice, by love that never made a fuss about itself. She reached over and touched Jacob's back, and then Tom's hand. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about the name." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Jacob." "No," she laughed. "The ranch, the sign." He followed her gaze to the cedar plaque hanging over the doorway. "I love what it says," she went on, "but I think it's time to carve one more name." Tom looked at her confused. "I want it to say Monroe Delaney," she said. "Not just for James, for me, and for Jacob, and for you." Tom swallowed. "You sure about that?" "I've been sure for a long while now," she said. "Just took me some time to find the words." Tom set Jacob down and turned to face her fully. "Then maybe it's time I found my own words too." She tilted her head, teasing. "You got a whole handful of 'em." "Only the ones that matter," he said. Then, right there on the porch, with the evening sun turning the cedar sign gold, he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small worn box. Her breath caught. "I know I'm late asking," he said, "but I'd like to ask anyway. Abigail Monroe, will you marry me? Not just in name or deed, but the way a man means it when he gives his whole heart." She stared at him, eyes wide, chest full. Then she laughed deep and happy and threw her arms around his neck. "You fool," she whispered. "I've been yours since the day you brought me coffee and fixed that gate." He held her tightly, Jacob pressed between them, squealing with joy. 2 weeks later, the townsfolk gathered under the big cottonwood tree out near the southern paddock. It was a simple wedding with wildflowers from the pasture and music from a fiddle that Tom's old friend Samuel brought up from town. Abigail wore a soft blue dress, and her hair was tied back with a ribbon Jacob had picked out from the mercantile. Tom wore his cleanest shirt boots, polished, and a nervous grin that wouldn't leave his face. The preacher spoke, but no one remembered the words. What folks did remember was how Abigail's voice didn't tremble when she said "I do," and how Tom's hands never left hers. After the ceremony, they walked back to the ranch together. Abigail's sisters had come standing with moist eyes and awkward smiles, but that gap was beginning to close. They talked about Galveston and summer winds, about trade ships and babies. Abigail didn't promise to visit, but she promised to ride. Tom carried Jacob on his shoulders, the boy gurgling and clutching at clouds like he owned the whole sky. And maybe he did. That night, as stars winked open over the Texas plains, Tom and Abigail sat beneath the cedar-signed cups of coffee, between them hands entwined. "I've been thinking again," she murmured. Tom chuckled. Dangerous habit. "Maybe we add more cattle next season, and 2 more hands. This place is growing." "It is," he agreed. "So is our boy. And who knows," she said with a sideways glance, "maybe he won't be the only one for long." Tom froze. "You mean?" She nodded. "Doctor confirms it. Another baby come autumn." His heart slammed like a hammer. "Abby." She leaned against his shoulder. "You're not scared, are you?" He kissed her hair. "Not if you're with me." The stars turned slow overhead, and in the quiet hush of the land the sound of a cradle wind drifted through the trees. Life moved forward just as it always had, but now it moved together. And under that cedar sign carved with names that once meant loss and now meant love, the Delaney family began again. Not just a ranch, not just a story, but a home forever.